A USS Defiance shook violently as another enemy blast struck its hull. Captain Jake Morrison gripped his chair and watched the main screen with growing horror. All around them, human ships were dying. Status report. Morrison shouted over the noise of alarms and sparking equipment. "We've lost contact with Admiral Carter's flagship," said Ben Rodriguez from the tactical station. His voice was tight with fear. "The Vorthik have destroyed over half our fleet in the last 10 minutes. Morrison stared at the screen. The Vorthik ships looked like giant metal insects mixed with living tissue. They pulsed and moved in ways that made his skin crawl. There, dark hulls seemed to breathe, and strange lights flickered across their surfaces like nerve signals. "Sir, the enemy ships are changing," reported Amy Sullivan from engineering. "They're adapting to our weapons. Every time we hit them, they become stronger against that same attack." This was what made the Vorthik so terrifying. They had conquered every species in the galaxy for 300 years. No one had ever beaten them because they learned from every battle. They took whatever you threw at them and became immune to it. Within minutes, Chris Taylor looked up from the communications console. "Captain, I'm picking up Admiral Carter's distress signal. Her ship is badly damaged and surrounded." Morrison watched as 5 Vorthik vessels closed in on the Admiral's flagship. The human ship fired everything it had, but the alien ships barely noticed. Their hulls rippled and changed, absorbing the energy blasts like sponges soaking up water. "They're not just immune to our weapons now," Ben said quietly. "They're feeding on them, getting stronger." The Admiral's ship exploded in a bright flash. Morrison closed his eyes for a moment. Lisa Carter had been his friend for 15 years. Now she was gone, along with 3,000 crew members. "Captain," Amy called out, "we need to retreat. Our weapons aren't working, and we can't take much more damage." Morrison looked around at his crew. They were all young, all scared, but they were still at their posts. The Defiance was just a small patrol ship with 42 people aboard. They were never meant to fight in a battle like this. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked. Chris checked his readings. 18, sir, down from 200. The Vorthik haven't lost a single vessel." Morrison felt sick. Earth's entire outer defense fleet was being destroyed, and there was nothing they could do about it. The Vorthik ships moved through space like sharks through water, tearing apart everything in their path. "Sir, we're getting new orders," Chris said. "All remaining ships are to fall back to Earth immediately. We're to report to General Walsh at Earth Defense Command." Morrison nodded. "Set course for Earth. Maximum speed." As the Defiance turned away from the battle, Morrison took one last look at the carnage. Pieces of human ships floated in space like broken toys. The Vorthik vessels were already moving on, heading toward the inner system, toward Earth. The journey back to Earth took 6 hours. Morrison spent most of it in his quarters, writing reports and trying not to think about all the friends he had lost. When he finally reached Earth's orbit, he could see the panic below. Ships were fleeing in every direction, loaded with people trying to escape. General Kevin Walsh met Morrison at Earth Defense Command. The general looked like he had not slept in days. His gray hair was messy, and his uniform was wrinkled. "Captain Morrison," Walsh said, shaking his hand, "I'm glad you made it back. We need to hear what happened out there." Morrison sat down and told the general everything. He described how the Vorthik ships adapted to their weapons, how they seemed to feed on energy, and how quickly they had destroyed the human fleet. "They're not just machines," Morrison explained. "They're something else, something alive. They learn and change faster than we can react." Walsh nodded grimly. "We've been studying reports from other species the Vorthik have conquered. Every civilization tells the same story. No matter what they tried, The Vorthik adapted and won. What about evacuation? Morrison asked. How many people can we get off Earth? Not enough, Walsh said. We have maybe 2 weeks before they reach Earth. We can evacuate a few million people, but there are billions on the planet. Morrison felt his heart sink. So we're going to fight? We have to try, Walsh said. But every strategy we've tested, every weapon we've built, other species have tried them all before. The Vorthik have seen it all. The general walked to a window and looked out at the busy spaceport below. Ships were loading refugees as fast as they could. Families were saying goodbye, not knowing if they would ever see each other again. Captain, Walsh said, I have a mission for you. It's dangerous, probably impossible, but it might be our only chance. Morrison straightened up. What do you need me to do? I want you to take the Defiance and turn it into something the Vorthik have never seen before. We're going to load it with every experimental weapon and system we've been too scared to test. Things that might kill you before the enemy does. A suicide mission, Morrison said quietly. Yes, Walsh admitted. But if we can surprise them, if we can do something completely unexpected, maybe we can buy time for more people to escape. Morrison thought about his crew. They were good people who deserved to live. But he also thought about the billions of people on Earth who would die if the Vorthik won. I'll need volunteers, he said. No one should be forced into this. Walsh smiled for the first time since Morrison had arrived. I figured you'd say that. You're a good man, Jake. Morrison stood up and shook the general's hand. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. And Captain ... Thank you. As Morrison walked back to his ship, he wondered if he was making the right choice. The Vorthik had never been defeated. They had conquered every species in the galaxy. What made him think that one small human ship could make a difference? But then he thought about Admiral Carter and all the other people who had died fighting these monsters. If this was humanity's last chance, then someone had to take it. The Defiance might be small, but it was still fighting. And sometimes that was enough. The next morning, Captain Morrison stood in the ship's meeting room facing his crew. Everyone was there, all 42 members of the Defiance. Their faces showed worry and confusion. They knew something big was happening. I'm going to be honest with you, Morrison began. The Vorthik fleet is heading for Earth. We have maybe 2 weeks before they arrive. General Walsh has asked us to volunteer for a special mission. Ben Rodriguez leaned forward. What kind of mission, sir? Morrison took a deep breath. A suicide mission. We're going to modify the Defiance with experimental weapons that have never been tested in battle. Then we're going to try to stop the Vorthik fleet. The room went quiet. Morrison could see the fear in their eyes, but also something else. Determination. Amy Sullivan spoke up first. Captain, my whole family lives on Earth. My parents, my little sister. If this mission might save them, I'm in. One by one, the crew members volunteered. Not everyone said yes right away. Some needed time to think. But in the end, 38 people chose to stay. 4 crew members asked to transfer to evacuation duty, and Morrison let them go without question. Thank you, Morrison said to those who remained. I know this isn't easy, but we're going to make those alien monsters pay for what they've done. The modifications began immediately. Scientists and engineers swarmed over the Defiance, installing equipment that looked dangerous even when turned off. Dr. Helen Park, a thin woman with wild gray hair, supervised the work. Captain, Dr. Park explained as they walked through the ship, we're installing 3 types of experimental weapons. The first is a quantum disruptor. It fires bursts of energy that exist in multiple dimensions at once. Does it work? Morrison asked. Dr. Park shrugged. Sometimes. It has a 50% chance of exploding and killing everyone on the ship. But when it works, it can punch through almost anything. They stop at the next installation. This is a temporal shield generator, Dr. Park continued. It creates a bubble of slowed time around the ship. Enemy weapons move slower, giving us more time to react. And the bad news? Morrison asked. It makes our crew age faster. An hour of battle could cost us days of life. Also, it might create a black hole. Morrison rubbed his forehead. Wonderful. What's the third system? The Phoenix AI, Dr. Park said proudly. It's designed to think like a human, but faster. It can make decisions that no logical computer would make. Completely unpredictable. They reached the ship's new computer core. The Phoenix IS housing was a strange mix of biological and mechanical parts. It pulsed with a soft blue light. "Hello, Captain Morrison," the AI said in a voice that sounded almost human. "I'm looking forward to our mission. It should be interesting." Morrison felt uneasy. Can we trust it? Probably not, Dr. Park admitted. But the Vorthic are very good at predicting logical behavior. Phoenix is designed to be illogical. It might be our only advantage. The work continued for 10 days. The Defiance was transformed into something that barely looked like a human ship anymore. Strange equipment covered every surface. Cables and pipes ran through the hallways. The ship hummed with dangerous energy. Chief Medical Officer Sam Turner worked overtime treating crew members who were hurt by the unstable systems. The quantum disruptor leaked radiation. The temporal shield gave people headaches. The Phoenix I sometimes talked to itself in languages that didn't exist. "Captain," Sam said during one of their medical meetings, "half the crew is showing signs of stress from the experimental systems. We're asking their bodies to handle things they weren't designed for." Morrison nodded. "Can they still fight?" "For a while. But this equipment is slowly killing us, even when it's turned off." On the 11th day, Chris Taylor picked up long-range signals. "Captain, I'm detecting Vorthic scout ships at the edge of the solar system. They're moving fast." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. "How long until they reach Earth?" 3 days, sir. Maybe less." Morrison activated the ship's communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. The enemy has arrived. We launch in 6 hours. The final preparations were frantic. Last-minute adjustments to the weapons, final checks of the life support systems, and personal messages recorded for families." Back on Earth, Morrison found himself in his quarters, staring at a picture of his wife, Rachel Stone. She was a lieutenant commander in the evacuation fleet, helping to get civilians away from Earth. He had not seen her in weeks. His door chimed. "Come in," he called. Ben Rodriguez entered, looking nervous. "Captain, I have to ask, do you really think we can win?" Morrison set down the picture. "No, Ben, I don't think we can win. But I think we can hurt them. And maybe that will be enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to show the galaxy that the Vorthic can be fought. Every species they've conquered just gave up when their first attacks failed. But humans, we don't give up." Ben nodded slowly. "Even when we should?" "Especially then." An hour before launch, Morrison got a message from General Walsh. The Vorthic main fleet had been spotted near Jupiter. There were over 50 ships, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built. "Final crew meeting," Morrison announced. The crew gathered in the main cargo hold. They looked tired but determined. Morrison could see that some of them were scared, but none of them wanted to back down. "In 1 hour, we're going to face an enemy that has never been defeated," Morrison said. "They've conquered every species in the galaxy. They adapt to every weapon, every strategy. By all logic, we should lose." He paused and looked at each of their faces. "But we're not logical. We're human. And humans have a long history of doing impossible things when everything looks hopeless." Amy Sullivan raised her hand. "Captain, What if the experimental weapons don't work? Then we'll try something else, Morrison said. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something even crazier. The Vorthik expect us to follow military doctrine, to fight like every other species. But we're not going to do that. What are we going to do? Asked Chris Taylor. Morrison smiled grimly. We're going to fight like humans. Desperate, stubborn, and too stupid to know when we're beaten. The crew laughed, but it was a nervous sound. They all knew they were probably going to die. But they also knew they were going to take some of the enemy with them. Positions, everyone, Morrison ordered. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity. As the crew moved to their stations, Morrison took one last look around the ship. The Defiance didn't look like much anymore. It was covered in experimental equipment, leaking energy and making strange noises. But it was still flying, and it was still fighting. The ship's engines roared to life. The Defiance pulled away from Earth's orbital station and headed toward the outer system. Behind them, Earth looked small and vulnerable. Ahead of them, the Vorthik fleet waited. Morrison settled into his captain's chair and checked his instruments. Everything was working, sort of. The quantum disruptor was charged, the temporal shield was ready, and the Phoenix AI was humming quietly to itself. All stations report ready, Ben announced. Morrison nodded. Then let's go remind the galaxy that humans don't surrender. The Defiance accelerated toward Jupiter, toward the waiting Vorthik fleet, toward what would probably be their last battle. But Morrison felt strangely calm. Win or lose, they were going to fight. And sometimes that was all that mattered. The Vorthik fleet appeared on the Defiance's sensors like a swarm of giant insects. Captain Morrison counted 53 enemy ships surrounding Jupiter, each one 10 times larger than his small vessel. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed with sickly green light, and strange growths covered their surfaces like tumors. They're beautiful in a horrible way, Amy Sullivan whispered from her engineering station. Morrison had to agree. The Vorthik ships looked alive, breathing and moving through space as if they were swimming through water instead of vacuum. But he also knew that each one contained enough firepower to destroy a planet. Distance to enemy fleet? Morrison asked. 2 million kilometers and closing, Ben Rodriguez reported. They've detected us, sir. I'm reading massive energy buildups across their entire fleet. They're not taking any chances, Morrison said. 50 ships against 1. I'd be insulted if I wasn't so terrified. The Phoenix IS voice came through the speakers. Captain, I'm analyzing the enemy formation. They're arranging themselves in a standard conquest pattern. Very logical. Very predictable. And that's supposed to help us how? Morrison asked. Because I'm designed to be unpredictable, Phoenix replied. I have 17 different battle plans, and none of them make sense according to normal military doctrine. Chris. Taylor looked up from his station. Captain, I'm picking up Vorthik communications. They're confused. They're asking each other why we're approaching alone. Morrison smiled grimly. They've never faced a species stupid enough to charge straight at them. Fire a warning shot. With conventional weapons. Let's see what happens. Ben pressed the firing controls. A single plasma bolt shot out from the Defiance and struck the nearest Vorthik ship. The enemy vessel's hull rippled for a moment, then grew thicker and darker. As expected, Dr. Park said from her science station, they've adapted to our plasma weapons. That ship is now immune to that type of energy. Time for the fun part. Morrison said, Amy, bring the quantum disruptor online. Amy's hands moved over her controls with practiced skill. Quantum disruptor charging, sir. But I'm reading some concerning energy fluctuations. Define concerning, Morrison said. There's a 30% chance it will explode and kill us all, Amy replied calmly. I like those odds, Morrison said. Fire when ready. The quantum disruptor fired, and reality seemed to bend around the energy beam. The blast hit the same Vorthic ship that had adapted to their plasma weapons. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the enemy vessel began to shake and twist as if it were being pulled in multiple directions at once. "Direct hit," Ben shouted. "The target is." "Wait, what's happening to it?" The Vorthic ship was changing. Its hull was rippling and flowing like liquid metal, but it couldn't seem to settle on a stable form. Lights flickered across its surface, in chaotic patterns. "They're trying to adapt," Dr. Park explained excitedly. "But quantum energy exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their adaptation systems can't figure out which dimension to protect against." Chris Taylor's voice was full of wonder. "Captain, I'm intercepting Vorthic communications. They're completely confused. They keep saying this is impossible and illogical." Morrison felt a spark of hope. "What about the other ships? Are they adapting to our quantum weapons?" "That's the strange part," Dr. Park said. "They're trying to, but each ship is adapting differently. Some are trying to protect against energy, others against dimensional effects. They can't agree on what they're defending against." The damaged Vorthic ship suddenly exploded in a burst of multicolored light. The other enemy vessels immediately began changing their formations, their hulls shifting and adapting as they tried to protect themselves. "They're scared," Morrison realized. For the first time in their history, they don't know what to do. "Captain," Phoenix interrupted, "I suggest we do something even more unpredictable. May I recommend activating the temporal shield and then ramming the nearest enemy ship?" Morrison blinked. "That's insane. We'd be destroyed." "Exactly," Phoenix replied cheerfully. "No logical species would attempt such a strategy. The Vorthic won't be prepared for it." Ben looked at Morrison with wide eyes. "Sir, are we really going to follow battle advice from an AI that admits it's crazy?" Morrison thought for a moment. They had destroyed one enemy ship, but there were 52 left. Conventional tactics wouldn't work against an enemy that adapted to everything. Maybe crazy was exactly what they needed. "Amy, activate the temporal shield," Morrison ordered. "Ben, set collision course with the nearest Vorthic ship. Chris, broadcast our attack plan to the enemy fleet." "Sir?" Chris asked, confused. "You heard me. Tell them exactly what we're about to do. Let them try to adapt to a strategy that makes no sense." The temporal shield activated with a low humming sound. Suddenly, everything outside the ship seemed to slow down. Enemy weapons fire moved like thick liquid through space. The Vorthic ships appeared to be barely moving. "Time dilation active," Amy reported. "We're experiencing time at roughly 3 times normal speed. But Captain, this is aging us rapidly." Morrison could feel it. His body felt heavier, his movements slower, but his mind was working faster than ever. "How long can we maintain this?" "Maybe an hour of real time," Amy said. "But it will cost us days of our lives." "Worth it," Morrison said. Ben, full speed toward the target. The Defiance shot forward like a bullet. The Vorthic ships tried to respond, but their reaction seemed sluggish compared to the human ship's enhanced speed. "Captain," Chris reported, "the Vorthic are receiving our transmission. They're laughing. They think we're committing suicide." "Maybe we are," Morrison said. "Phoenix, any last-minute brilliant ideas?" "Actually, yes," the AI replied. 30 seconds before impact, deactivate the temporal shield and fire the quantum disruptor at point-blank range. Then activate the shield again and turn hard to port. Morrison shook his head. "That's even crazier than the original plan." "Thank you," Phoenix said proudly. The Defiance raced toward the Vorthic ship, which was now firing everything it had at the approaching human vessel. But the enemy weapons moved too slowly to hit their target. 20 seconds to impact, Ben announced. Morrison could see the enemy ship growing larger on the screen. It was massive, covered in weapon ports and organic growths. He could see smaller craft moving around it like antibodies around a virus. 10 seconds, Ben said. Now! Morrison shouted. Amy deactivated the temporal shield. Suddenly, everything sped up. The Vorthik ship's weapons fire rushed toward them like a wall of death. Ben fired the quantum disruptor at point-blank range, and the energy beam punched through the enemy ship's hull like a hot knife through butter. Amy reactivated the temporal shield just as Ben threw the ship into a hard turn. The Defiance scraped along the Vorthik ship's hull, tearing metal and biological matter away in a shower of sparks. "We're through," Ben shouted. Morrison looked at the main screen. The Vorthik ship was splitting in half, its biomechanical systems sparking and dying. But more importantly, the other enemy ships were retreating. "They're falling back," Chris reported in amazement. "The entire fleet is withdrawing." "Why?" Morrison asked. Dr. Park checked her readings. "Captain, I think we've broken their adaptation protocols. They've never faced an enemy that would deliberately damage itself to win. Their computers don't know how to respond to suicidal tactics." Morrison felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The temporal shield had aged him, and he could feel years of his life slipping away. But they had done something impossible. They had made the Vorthik fleet retreat. "Damage report," Morrison ordered. "Hull damage on decks 3 through 7. Amy reported. "The temporal shield is offline, and the quantum disruptor needs major repairs. But we're alive." "Captain," Chris said excitedly, "I'm picking up communications from across the galaxy. Other species are hearing about what we did. They're calling it a miracle." Morrison smiled tiredly. "It's not a miracle. It's just humans being too stubborn to know when they're beaten." "Sir," Ben said quietly, "the Vorthik fleet is regrouping near Jupiter's moons. They're not leaving the system." Morrison nodded. "They're trying to figure out how to adapt to insanity." "Good luck with that." Phoenix's voice came through the speakers. "Captain, I have analyzed the enemy's response patterns. They are confused but not defeated. They will return with new strategies. Then we'll have to be even more unpredictable," Morrison said. Amy looked at him with concern. "Captain, we can't keep using the temporal shield. It's killing us." Morrison looked around at his crew. They all looked older, more tired. The price of their victory was written on their faces. "I know," he said softly. "But we're not done yet. We've shown the galaxy that the Vorthik can be hurt. Now we need to show them that humans never give up." The Defiance limped away from the battle site, its hull scarred but its crew unbroken. Behind them, the Vorthik fleet prepared for another attack. But for the first time in 300 years, they were no longer certain of victory. The war was just beginning. The Defiance drifted through space near Saturn's rings, its hull patched with whatever materials the crew could find. Captain Morrison sat in his command chair, studying the enemy fleet through the view screen. The Vorthik ships had changed again, their biomechanical hulls now covered with new growths and weapon systems. "They've been adapting for 6 hours," Dr. Park reported from her science station. "I'm reading completely new defensive configurations. They're preparing for our quantum weapons and temporal shields." Morrison rubbed his tired eyes. The last battle had aged him by at least 5 years, and he could feel it in his bones. Around him, his crew looked older too, their faces lined with exhaustion and the cost of using technology that was slowly killing them. "Captain," Amy Sullivan called from engineering, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that I've jury-rigged the quantum disruptor back to working condition. The bad news is that it's even more unstable than before." "How much more unstable?" Morrison asked. "Well, there's now a 60% chance it will explode and take us with it," Amy replied cheerfully. But I've also made some ... modifications. Morrison sighed. What kind of modifications? I've connected it to the ship's coffee maker, Amy said. Now it randomly changes power levels based on how much coffee the crew drinks. The more coffee, the more chaotic the weapon becomes. Ben Rodriguez stared at her. You weaponized our coffee machine? Hey, you said we needed to be unpredictable. Amy shrugged. The Vorthik will never figure out that our weapon's power depends on our caffeine intake. Chris Taylor looked up from his communication station. Captain, I'm picking up interesting signals from the Vorthik fleet. They're running thousands of battle simulations, trying to predict our next move. And Morrison asked. Their computers keep crashing, Chris grinned. Every time they try to simulate human behavior, their systems overload. They can't understand why we would deliberately hurt ourselves to win. The Phoenix AI's voice came through the speakers, sounding almost amused. Captain, I've been analyzing the enemy's psychological profile. They are a species that values efficiency and logical thinking above all else. Our chaotic tactics are causing them something like a nervous breakdown. Good, Morrison said. Let's give them something else to worry about. Amy, start deliberately breaking our own systems. Amy blinked. Sir, you heard me. I want you to sabotage our own ship. Make it less efficient, more unpredictable. If the Vorthik are studying us, let's make sure they're studying something that doesn't make sense. Dr. Park stood up excitedly. Captain, that's brilliant. We can create controlled chaos. Make our systems randomly fail and recover in ways that look accidental, but are actually planned. But sir, Ben protested, that's incredibly dangerous. If we sabotage our own ship during battle, we could accidentally destroy ourselves. Morrison smiled grimly. Ben, we're already dying from our own weapons. At least this way, we're dying. On our own terms. Amy began working on her console with dangerous enthusiasm. I can make the lights flicker randomly, cause the artificial gravity to fluctuate, and make the navigation system give us wrong directions that are somehow still correct. Perfect, Morrison said. What else can we break? I'll make the weapons. Fire backwards sometimes, Amy continued. And I'll program the shields to randomly protect the enemy instead of us. Sam Turner, the chief medical officer, looked horrified. Captain, this is insane. We're talking about deliberately crippling ourselves. No, Sam, Morrison said. We're talking about becoming something the Vorthak can't predict or adapt to. They've conquered every logical species in the galaxy. But they've never faced a species that fights by becoming more chaotic instead of more organized. Chris Taylor was monitoring the enemy communications. Captain, the Vorthik are confused by our current position. They can't understand why we're just sitting here instead of attacking or retreating. Because we're making them think, Morrison said. For the first time in their history, they have to consider that their enemy might do something that makes no sense. Phoenix spoke up. Captain, I have an idea. What if we send the Vorthik a message explaining our battle strategy? Morrison raised an eyebrow. You want to tell them our plans? Not our real plans, Phoenix explained. I want to tell them that we're using advanced human military doctrine based on chaos theory and quantum psychology. Make them think our insanity is actually sophisticated strategy. Ben laughed despite himself. So we're going to confuse them. By pretending our confusion is intentional? Exactly, Phoenix said proudly. The more they try to understand our advanced tactics, the more confused they'll become. Morrison considered this. Chris, send them a message. Tell them we're implementing Protocol Omega-7, which utilizes controlled entropy and probabilistic warfare. Sir, none of those are real things, Chris pointed out. That's what makes it perfect, Morrison grinned. The Vorthik will spend hours trying to figure out what those terms mean. As Chris sent the message, Amy finished her sabotage work. All done, Captain. Our ship is now officially unpredictable. The coffee maker is connected to the weapons. The lights are controlled by the artificial gravity and the navigation system. Will occasionally tell us we're flying backwards. Excellent, Morrison said. Now let's go back to the fight. The Defiance moved toward the Vorthic fleet, but not in a straight line. Amy's sabotage made the ship weave and wobble through space, like a drunk person walking home. The lights flickered randomly, and the artificial gravity kept changing direction. Captain, Ben reported, the enemy fleet is ... They're confused. Half of them are trying to intercept us, and half are trying to analyze our flight pattern. Morrison watched the main screen as the Vorthic ships moved in increasingly complex formations, trying to predict where the Defiance would go next. But with their navigation system randomly malfunctioning, even the human crew didn't know where they were going. This is working better than I hoped, Dr. Park said. The enemy is so focused on figuring out our tactics that they're forgetting to shoot at us. Don't jinx it, Morrison warned Dot as if summoned by his words. The Vorthic fleet suddenly opened fire. But their targeting systems, designed to predict logical movement patterns, couldn't lock onto the randomly moving human ship. They're missing us because we don't know where we're going. Amy laughed. This is either brilliant or the stupidest thing we've ever done. Why not both? Morrison said. Ben, return fire. Let the coffee maker decide how powerful our shots are. Ben pressed the firing controls, and the quantum disruptor shot out beams of wildly varying intensity. Some shots barely scratched the enemy hulls, while others punched through multiple ships at once. The Vorthic fleet began to retreat again, their biomechanical forms rippling with confusion. Their adaptation systems were trying to adjust to human weapons, but the constantly changing power levels made it impossible. Captain, Chris reported excitedly, I'm picking up panic signals from the enemy fleet. They're calling for reinforcements from across the galaxy. Morrison felt a chill. How many reinforcements? Hundreds of ships, sir. Maybe thousands. They're treating us like a major threat. Dr. Park looked up from her station. Captain, we should be proud. We've made the Vorthic so confused that they think one small human ship is worth calling their entire fleet. Great, Morrison said dryly. We've gone from being ignored to being the galaxy's most wanted. Phoenix's voice came through the speakers. Captain, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that our tactics are working beyond all expectations. The bad news is that we're about to face the largest Vorthic fleet in their history. Morrison looked around at his crew. They were tired, aged by their own weapons, and flying in a ship that was deliberately sabotaged. But they were still fighting. Well, Morrison said, at least we won't be bored. Amy raised her hand. Captain, I have one more idea. What if we pretend to surrender, but do it in such a confusing way that the Vorthic don't know if we're actually giving up or not? Morrison stared at her. Amy, that might be the most insane thing you've said yet. Thank you, sir. Amy beamed. Do it, Morrison ordered Dot as the Defiance continued its chaotic flight pattern. Morrison couldn't help but smile. They were probably all going to die, but at least they were dying in the most confusing way possible. And somehow, that felt very human. The Vorthic reinforcements arrived like a dark cloud, blotting out the stars. Captain Morrison watched through the Defiance's view screen as hundreds of enemy ships emerged from jump space, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with angry red light. The entire Jupiter system was now filled with alien vessels, all focused on destroying one small human ship. Final count, 347 enemy ships. Ben Rodriguez reported, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. Captain, we're outnumbered by more than 8,000 to 1. Morrison looked around at his crew. They were exhausted, aged by their own weapons, and flying in a ship that was falling apart. But none of them looked ready to give up. "Well," Morrison said, "at least we've got their attention." Amy Sullivan looked up from her engineering station, where she was making final adjustments to their sabotaged systems. "Captain, I've got one last modification to the quantum disruptor. I've connected it to the ship's self-destruct system." "Amy," Morrison said carefully, "please tell me you haven't turned our ship into a bomb." "Okay, I won't tell you that," Amy replied cheerfully. "But hypothetically, if I had done that, it would create a quantum cascade that would be completely unpredictable. The explosion might destroy everything in the system, or it might open a portal to another dimension, or it might just make a pretty light show." Dr. Park stared at her. "You don't know what it will do?" "That's what makes it perfect," Amy grinned. "The Vorthok can't adapt to something that even we don't understand." Chris Taylor was monitoring the enemy communications. "Captain, the Vorthok are trying to coordinate their attack, but they're having problems. Different ships are using different adaptation protocols, and they're interfering with each other." Morrison felt a spark of hope. "They're so focused on adapting to us that they're forgetting how to work together?" "Exactly," Chris said. "It's like they're all trying to solve different puzzles at the same time." The Phoenix AI's voice came through the speakers, sounding almost excited. "Captain, I've been analyzing the enemy fleet's behavior. They're suffering from what humans would call analysis paralysis. They're so afraid of making the wrong move that they can't make any move at all." "Then let's give them something to really worry about," Morrison said. "Amy, activate your whatever it is you've built." Amy's hands moved over her controls. "Quantum Cascade Disruptor / Self-Destruct / Mystery Device is now online. I've set it to activate if our ship takes critical damage, or if I press this big red button." Morrison looked at the big red button that definitely hadn't been there before. "Amy, where did you get a big red button?" "I made it out of the coffee. Maker's emergency stop," Amy explained. "I figured if we're going to die, we might as well do it with style." Ben was tracking the enemy fleet's movements. "Captain, they're surrounding us. But they're not attacking. They're waiting." Morrison realized what was happening. They're scared. For the first time in their history, the Vorthok are afraid of a single enemy ship. "We should be proud," Dr. Park said. "We've managed to terrify the most powerful species in the galaxy." Chris looked up from his station. "Captain, I'm receiving a transmission from the Vorthok command ship. They want to negotiate?" Morrison blinked. "The Vorthok want to negotiate? With us?" "It gets better," Chris continued. "They're asking what our terms are for surrender." "Our terms?" Morrison asked. "They want us to surrender to them?" "No, sir," Chris said with a grin. "They want to know what our terms are for accepting their surrender." The bridge went silent for a moment. Then Amy started laughing. "They think we're so dangerous that they're trying to surrender to us?" Morrison felt a strange mixture of pride and terror. "Put them on screen." The main view screen flickered, and suddenly Morrison was looking at something that made his skin crawl. The Vorthok commander was a mixture of flesh and machinery, with multiple eyes and writhing tentacles instead of arms. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding metal. "Human vessel," the creature said. "We request immediate negotiations. Your tactics are ... incomprehensible. We cannot adapt to strategies that defy all logic." Morrison stood up, trying to look more confident than he felt. "This is Captain Morrison of the human vessel Defiance. What exactly are you proposing?" "We offer you terms," the alien commander continued. "Cease your chaotic warfare, and we will withdraw from human space. We cannot risk our fleet against an enemy that weaponizes insanity." Morrison looked at his crew, who were all staring at him with wide eyes. They had done it. They had actually made the Vorthok afraid, but Morrison knew this was just the beginning. The Vorthik might leave human space, but they would continue conquering other species. And eventually, they would find a way to adapt to human tactics. I appreciate the offer, Morrison said to the alien commander. But I have a counterproposal. Speak, the creature hissed. You leave our galaxy, all of it, and you never come back. The Vorthik commander's eyes flashed with anger. That is unacceptable. We have conquered this galaxy for 3 centuries. We will not abandon it for one insane species. Morrison smiled. Amy, show them what happens when you press the big red button. Amy's hand hovered over the button. Captain, I should mention that I still don't know what this will do. Neither do they, Morrison said. And that's what makes it perfect. The Vorthik commander was speaking rapidly to its subordinates, their biomechanical forms rippling with agitation. Clearly, they were trying to analyze what the human ship might do, but their computers couldn't predict something that was completely random. You are bluffing, the commander finally said. No species would destroy itself just to harm others. Morrison laughed. Commander, you clearly don't know humans very well. We once had a saying, live free or die. We mean it. This is madness, the alien hissed. Yes, Morrison agreed. Yes, it is. Amy, activate the device. Amy pressed the big red button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Defiance began to glow with an impossible light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ship's hull became transparent, then solid, then transparent again. Space itself began to ripple around them like water. What is happening? The Vorthik commander demanded. I have no idea, Morrison said honestly. But it's definitely not something you can adapt to. The quantum cascade began to spread outward from the Defiance, washing over the nearest Vorthik. Ships, the alien vessels began to change, their biomechanical forms shifting into impossible shapes. Some ships became two-dimensional, others split into multiple copies of themselves, and a few seemed to disappear entirely. Retreat! The Vorthik commander screamed. All ships retreat immediately, but it was too late. The cascade was spreading faster than the alien ships could move. Across the solar system, Vorthik vessels were being transformed into things that shouldn't exist in normal space. Captain, Dr. Park said in wonder, we've created a zone of pure chaos. The laws of physics are breaking down. Morrison felt the effects himself. He could see through his own hand, and when he spoke, his voice echoed from the past and future simultaneously. How long will this last? Unknown, Amy said, her voice coming from several directions at once. But I don't think the Vorthik will be bothering anyone for a while. The alien commander's image flickered on the screen. You have ... You have destroyed everything. Your own system, your own planet. Morrison looked at the view screen, where Earth should have been. Instead, he saw something that looked like a planet made of pure light, existing in multiple dimensions at once. Earth is fine, Morrison said. It's just ... different, and so are we. He realized he was right. The crew of the Defiance was changing. Too, they were becoming something new, something that existed partially outside normal space and time. We're not quite human anymore, Ben said, his voice filled with wonder. No, Morrison agreed. But we're still fighting. The Vorthik commander's image was fading as the cascade reached the command ship. This is not over, human. We will find a way to adapt. We will return. Morrison smiled as he felt himself becoming something beyond human understanding. Maybe. You will, but if you do, you'll find that we've adapted too, and we'll be ready for you. The view screen went dark as the quantum cascade reached its peak. The Defiance was no longer a ship in the traditional sense. It was something new, something that existed in the spaces between dimensions. Captain, Chris said, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. I'm picking up signals from across the galaxy. The cascade is spreading. Every world the Vorthik have conquered is being affected. Morrison felt a deep satisfaction. The other species are being freed? More than that, Chris replied. They're being changed. Even the same chaotic nature that helped us fight back. The Vorthik won't be able to reconquer them. Amy's laughter echoed through dimensions. We didn't just beat the Vorthik. We turned the entire galaxy into something they can't understand. Morrison looked around at his crew, who were now beings of pure energy and will. They had paid the ultimate price, but they had also achieved something impossible. So what now? Ben asked. Morrison considered the question. They were no longer human, no longer bound by the normal rules of space and time. They could go anywhere, do anything. Now we explore, Morrison said. We find out what we've become, and we make sure that no species ever has to face what we faced. The Defiance, now a vessel of pure poesy,